This conference will now be recorded.
Oh, all right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the third webinar for the 2019 Central Coast Writers Conference. Like I said, this is the third one that we've been doing. We've done Jeannie Bowerman, and we've done Chantal Amy Osman. And today joining us is Catherine Ann Jones. Hi, Catherine.
Hello.
Hi, so just to give a little quick input, my name is Bridget Butler-Sullivan, and I am Terry's assistant. I'm filling in for her today. So a little bit about Catherine. She's an award-winning author, playwright, and screenwriter. And actually, I recently found out that she was an actress too at one point. She's done many films in her life, including Unlikely Angel, The Christmas Wife, and a series called Touched by an Angel, which I have heard of that one. Actually, that was quite popular when I was younger. And then books, we have Way of Story, Heal Yourself with Writing, which actually won the 2014 Nautilus. Did I say that right, Catherine?
Yes,
Nautilus Award. What Story Are You Living? And Freud's Oracle. She's taught at many different schools, including the New School University, University of Southern California, Pacifica Graduate Institute, and Esalen and Omega. And she's currently a writing consultant, and she does that all over the world, the US, Europe, and Asia. And yeah, you can actually register for one of her online courses at wavestory.com. So yeah, Catherine, hi, welcome. How are you going? How are you doing today?
Thank you. Well, it's warm and it's in the 90s in Ojai, California.
Oh, it's in the 90s?
But I'm looking forward to the conference. You know, writing is a solitary act, so I think writing conferences are wonderful. I enjoy meeting other writers, and usually we're in our corner or in our office alone doing our thing. So it's a nice change and also inspirational, I think.
Mm-hmm. I know, simply having a conversation with a lot of these people, you get a lot more out of it than you think. It influences your writing, hearing the way that their processes go, you know, what different hurdles they've had to jump through. It kind of changes how your process.
One thing, Bridget, I'd like to say is I often say this to my students and clients, that I don't think there's any one way to write anything any more than there's one way to live your life. But I think it's very important of course, craft can be learned, and hopefully by attending some of these workshops, one learns tools and craft and so on. But I think it's very important for each writer to discover their own process and then kind of follow that, even though it may be very different than what someone else's is. You know, as long as you get where you're going, when someone picks up a book or sees a movie, they don't really care how it got there as long as it came to the end. So.
Right, and it's important to have the conversation open too about how difficult writing can actually be, because that is a good point. Once you have the finished, polished product, you know, nobody ever thinks about what it took, but some people, you know, it takes their whole life before they write their first book, you know, so to have an open conversation with people who have also struggled to do it.
Well, you know, one thing interesting about today, we live long. You know, in the Middle Ages, 36 was the medium age that you lived to. So we live a long time today, and we often have different lives, different marriages, different careers. I started as an actor in New York and thought I'd do that for my whole life. And then playwriting came. I wrote 12 plays that happily were produced. And then Hollywood invited me out, and I started writing feature films and television. Now I'm writing books. So, you know, we lead many lives in this life. So that's rather nice, you know.
Right, and now you're teaching classes too. So not just at conferences, but online you also can.
I taught graduate school for years, but I taught in New York and Los Angeles. but I taught the craft of writing. Then I kind of had a turning point. I was invited to the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, and I realized teaching the craft of writing is only half. The other half is what I call the invisibles. I know once when the New York Times interviewed me some years ago, I told them this. I said, we've become lopsided, living only in our heads. Writing, in order to serve the soul, must integrate outer craft with the inner world of intuition and feeling. So my goal with the Way of Story book and workshops, or in this master class, is to have the writers bring all of themselves to the table, not just the left brain, the logical part of the brain, but to bring both parts of the brain, to bring memory, sense memory. And I do short 5-minute writing exercises that tap into places you write from. Then if you're alone in your room writing, facing the blank page, often my students are surprised by what comes out of their writing from these visualizations and exercises, sometimes channeling. And they say, I don't know where that came from. Well, it came from a deeper part of your psyche. And that's rather exciting to see, these aha moments in class.
Yeah, here, so that actually leads us perfectly into what we're talking about today, your masterclass, like you were just saying, the way of story, the craft and soul of writing. So just a little background, this one is about narrative, correct?
All forms of narrative. So it could be a novel, a memoir, fiction or nonfiction. It could be a play, a screenplay. I have songwriters come. It could be songwriting, poetry, any story related form. And I teach it. I usually mix professional writers with beginning writers, and it works very well. They learn from each other.
Anyone can take this class at any point in their writing career.
Yep. Once I had a very well-known songwriter. She had won Grammy Awards and so on. And she came for a weekend workshop, The Way of Story, and she sat and cried for a day and a half because you start out writing because you love it. And then after 20 years being a professional in New York and Hollywood, you need to rediscover that core place that made you start writing in the first place. And after crying for a day, she just jumped in, and she said it was a very important turning point for her. She had to fall in love again with the process.
So can you break us or take us through the entire process? I mean, you can't give us too much about your masterclass, obviously, but it's 6 hours. Can you kind of run through what we do in that class?
Well, the goal of the Way of Story book and workshop is to integrate the craft and what I call the soul of writing, or the invisibles, which is, I referred to it a little bit earlier. It could be sense memory. It could be channeling. I find in my own writing, the best parts are when I get out of the way and something comes through me that's more than just me. And I can read the pages in the evening and say, where did this come from? This didn't come from me, but the idea is it came through me. I was the instrument. So I use visualizations. We do exercises for character, for dialogue. Of course, my background is mostly writing plays, movies, and television before it started writing books. But I noticed that for better or worse, media has influenced how books are written today, both fiction and nonfiction. So for instance, I recently saw a book that is all dialogue. You know, you used to have very little dialogue in books. And we learn about how by just 3 or 4 pages in, you have to hook the reader. And gone are the days when you can take 50 pages for your story to really begin. Well, of course, that would rule out such writers as Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Marcel Proust. But that's today, because just like movies have to hook you in those first 5-10 minutes, so does your book.
Very good point. So do you kind of run people through how to start that process as well? So how to get that hook going right off the bat?
Well, a lot of it has to do with finding your theme. One exercise I give that's the shortest exercise, but in a way it's the most challenging. I ask them to tell me your story in 2 sentences. Sounds simple, right? Actually, it's not. Sometimes it's worth rewriting that again and again till you nail it. And it serves 2 purposes. One, it can begin to nail the structure of what you're writing, the story structure and the theme. And 2, it's a very good marketing device. Like if you're sending a query letter to a producer, publisher, or agent, if you can tell your story succinctly in 2 sentences, you'll come across as being very professional and you know what you're writing. If you don't do these preliminary discoveries, if you just sit down and start writing your novel or book, it's like going from Los Angeles to New York and you end up in Mexico and you don't know why. So.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's a good way to start it off. And that's the thing. It's funny because Terry has told me this story before. She finished her first book and she was so excited and she wanted to start sharing it with everybody, right? But when she was asked the question, what is your story about? She had no idea. You wrote an entire book and you're supposed to put it into 2 sentences right off the top of your head. That's impossible. That's a tough trick to learn.
Well, it takes some work, but it'll save a lot of grief rewriting later. If you give time to the 2 sentences and then give time to maybe a 1 to 3 page outline in rewriting that. And then you'll have in other words, if you're building a house, you don't just start with the bricks. You build a skeleton first, right? A structure.
Yeah. Well, we actually this year during the master classes also have a somewhat different type of masterclass called pitch sessions, which are with Chantel and me, Osman, and Doug Richardson, where basically you can go in and practice selling your pitch to these, famous editors and screenwriters, so you can actually see what it's like when you're in that room trying to pitch your story to people.
Yeah, I think I'm doing one of those.
Oh, are you? That's
fantastic.
Yeah,
It's the art of pitching and story structure, where I have them come up and for 5 minutes they pitch their story to me. And of course, it's what we do in Hollywood to sell. In Hollywood, you sell a project initially by how good you talk it. But this really is very useful for people writing books or writing anything. So yeah, I do that. And then I give them feedback on their pitch and try and narrow it down so they can discover their theme.
Yeah. So for your masterclass in particular, how many various activities do your students go through?
Well, it's rather revolutionary because in the way of story, the craft and soul of writing, they actually write every day these short exercises and then share them and get feedback. Some are about character. Some are about their own experiences. Some are sense memory, For instance, when I was a young actor in New York, I studied with Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio. He was my first teacher in New York, and we would do sense memory exercises. It's how one of the five senses can associate and awaken certain emotions in you. So a lot of my exercises awaken feelings from the past, and it's not only for people writing memoir, because I think novels are a form of emotional autobiography. That means you're going to be drawn to write about something you feel strongly about because of something in your own past.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we try and tap into that. I usually see who's there. I ask the class what genres they're writing. Like if many are writing movies or memoir, then I'll shape the master class toward that.
So what do you find that people tend to enjoy the most? Is it character? Is it plot? Is it, what parts of the story, what activities do they tend to enjoy the most?
I don't really understand that question. I mean, if you're building a house, do you enjoy the window or the door more?
Mm.
You need both. You need it all. So it's that's all I can say about that.
Yeah. So when people read out loud, are they reading to the entire class, or are they reading in their specific groups, or how does it go?
The entire class. So one of the things when people ask, what do I bring to your class? I say paper and pen or laptop and courage. It takes a lot of courage to be a writer, because you're really drawing from your whole self, your past, everything you are. If you really take the plunge and do it 100%, it takes a bit of courage.
Absolutely. Your characters. I mean, most people can trace people that they know, parts of themselves, through the characters that they've written and created.
One advice I give them is, if you're writing, even if you're calling it a fiction, but you're writing about, say, a parent or a past husband or whatever, I tell them use the real names in the early drafts, just so you can tap into the emotional power. But then by the last draft, change the names.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people would take well to their names being put in there. That is a good idea, though.
Only do that at the end. Use the real names for the early drafts.
Right, because then they're real to you as you're writing.
Exactly. And I do exercises asking people to write about specific someone in their past, and then to write about it in such a way, not what they meant to you, but I tell them, if I walked into a room with 200 people, I should know immediately which person you've written about. The physical attributes and so on. And then I tell them, even if you're writing fictional characters, they should be as real as your grandfather or mother or teacher you wrote about.
Absolutely. That's what makes a story really stand out, especially with dialogue, I think. Does the dialogue read like how people actually speak?
Exactly. Yeah, sometimes I teach memoir, and I call Finding Your Voice in Memoir. And it's important to find the voice of each character you're writing about, not just the writer's voice, I think.
Exactly.
Of course,
So
as a dramatist, that's automatic, or should be.
Yeah. In your experience, when you're writing character, how much of it, how was I going to say this? Like when you're writing a dialogue, do you tend to focus from a particular character's point of view, or do you try to see it from all the different different characters' points of view. Does that make sense? So if you're writing a conversation, are you trying to understand what?
You know, it's a little difficult to give general answers to these. As we talked earlier before we started recording about writing, we were talking about writing processes, and I mentioned that sometimes I have a different process for different projects I'm writing. The process has to suit the project, you know, and it's the same with, and you don't sit down and say, I'm writing character, I'm writing dialogue. You're writing a story. To me, it's all about the story. And in the story are people. They're not characters, they're people, real people, whether they're fiction or nonfiction. They're real to me. And so I let them have their voice. Sometimes they take over. I mean, I've had the experience writing plays where a small character, a small role will just grow and become a major character. Or two characters are not strong enough, so they merge and become a composite. So the process can be a little mysterious, and you have to surrender to the process. You don't object, at least I can't objectify if I'm writing a first draft. I just have to let it have its way with me, if you will.
Okay, so is that kind of what you help guide through in your masterclass, is how you kind of let the...
I don't do a lot of lecturing. It's interactive, and it's based on these short exercises that they write and get feedback. I'll give you one example. I had a very intelligent woman in one of my classes, and she was writing a dialogue exercise, and she had no background in acting or playwriting, or screenwriting. So the dialogue was rather stiff. It wasn't working. So I sometimes draw on my earlier acting training in New York. So I had her get up with another student, and I did an improvisation. And I have them push their hands together as hard as they can while they're doing it. And it gets very uncomfortable for her. But she starts feeling the emotion her character is feeling. And of course, what comes out with what she's saying is 10 times better than what she wrote. I don't know if I explained that well, but it comes, yeah. And the class would just applaud because, you know, and she realized she had to feel it. Once at Esalen many years ago, I had an older gentleman who had been in the army in World War II, and he was one of the first soldiers to liberate Auschwitz, the concentration camp. And ever since then, he's wanted to write about it. For years, he tried to write a memoir about that terrible experience of the Holocaust. And it never quite came together. And he read some of what he had written, and it was very flat, objective. It didn't touch us. So I got him on his feet. I sat him in a chair. I told him to close his eyes. And I took him back to that moment at the end of the war where they liberated Auschwitz. And I said, this is not something you're remembering. It's happening now. So when you open your eyes, I want you to tell me what you see. And when his eyes were closed, I had about 15 people in the class lie down on the floor like they were bodies. So he opened his eyes, and he remembered things he had blocked out all these decades. He remembered, and so I told him to act it out. And one of the memories he had that he was feeling so strongly, he was crying, was one of the bodies was still alive, and he took a cup of water to that man. And at the end of the class, I get moved just talking about this, At the end, when we broke for lunch, he came up to me and said, "Now I know why I had to wait so many decades to write this. It wasn't enough to remember the story. I had to feel the story."
And then he could actually execute it and put it into his own words.
Yes.
And make other people understand what it was in their own way.
Yeah, there was not a dry eye in the whole class when he described that to us after I was crying. Everyone was. It came alive to see. So you learn in screenwriting and in television writing, you want to make the audience feel something. And there's a smorgasbord of what you want to, you might make them want to feel sexually excited or terrified or blissful, whatever it is. But in order to do that, you have to feel it first.
Yeah, because if you feel it, then you believe it.
I think that's true of why we read too often. Something we're educated not to do in our educational system and often in our family system is feel and trust that emotion. It's a very valuable tool as a writer.
Especially when you're connecting with your characters and you're connecting with what they're experiencing and, you know, their sorrow, their happiness, whatever it is that they're taking on.
But you see, there's not a separation of you're not objectifying these characters. You are those characters. You know, it's not an analytical process, at least with me.
Well, I have a question then. If you're feeling these characters, how do you make them distinct from yourself so that they really are separate? You're bringing separate people to life.
I think it's called imagination. I don't mean everything you write is like yourself. It's what I mean by emotionally autobiographical. The feeling is genuinely mine. In other words, I could write about someone who murdered someone. I've never murdered anyone. But there are moments in my life where I felt so angry I could kill. So I tap into that, just like an actor does.
So there are bits of you in the character, right?
But the analytical critic has a place in the process, but not the first draft. I always ask the students we all have an internal critic. I'm hearing a lot of weird sounds.
Wait, yeah, sorry. Anne, do you mind muting your call, please?
Yeah, I just did.
Okay, I always tell my students, we all have this eternal critic. It's usually an internal parent of, one of our parents, a critical parent. And I always tell them to lock that critic in a closet until you have a first draft written. Then maybe leave it for a couple of weeks. And then when you take it out, then you can invite that critic to sit on your shoulder. It's like, as an editor and writing consultant, I tell them I'm a compassionate teacher, but I'm a ruthless critic. Even on my own work, I would say, especially on my own work. And then you look at your work more objectively. And then, as Hemingway said famously, kill your darlings. Sometimes you have to cut your favorite line in the book or script or play, because then you see the whole and you can be analytical, and then you bring that to play. But at least in my process, when I'm doing a first draft, I try to not think like the critic. Because if you think like the critic, I don't know how you can finish writing anything.
That's true, because you always have them in the back of your mind,
Yeah. It'll become an obstacle to the original process, the initial process.
Absolutely. So you also have a couple other things that you're going to be doing at the conference. We talked a little bit about the art of pitching and story structure as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to do a panel on Friday night, which is why you should join a writing group. So can you maybe open up a little bit about that too? I mean, we talked about having the conversation open about how difficult writing can be, but you yourself, are you personally in a writing group? Have you ever facilitated or joined one, or, you know, run us through that?
I've never been in a writing group, but I've taught for 30 years. So I've taught groups of writing, in graduate school, and also in Ojai. Every 6 months, I do a all-day Saturday workshop, and some people come back 4 or 5 times to that. They call it a jump start or whatever. Well, as I said earlier, writing is a solitary act. And the good thing I think about writing classes or workshops, first they give you a deadline. So by the next class, you have to have something to show. I love deadlines myself. That's why I love having contracts. And sometimes in Hollywood, they'd tell me, oh, take your time with this. And I say, don't tell me that. Give me a deadline, because I always meet my deadlines. And it just helps, you push on. But it's also nice to have other people. One very valuable lesson I learned when I wrote The Inevitable Dysfunctional Family play. By the way, I often tell people, for those of you who want to be writers and you do not come from a dysfunctional family, I'm sorry for you. There's no better background for a writer, believe me, all that juicy material. So when I wrote my dysfunctional family play, I thought it's something I had to expel, like an exorcism to expel the ghost. But it wouldn't relate to anybody else. So I just write it and then put it in my drawer and push on and write. Because I had already written about Virginia Woolf and Calamity Jane, both play and musical and so on. I was amazed when The Women of Cedar Creek, my dysfunctional Texas family play, it won more awards than any of my other 12 plays. And people would come up and say, "That I'm from Kansas. That's my mother exactly. How could you know?" Or I'm from Toronto. That's my sister exactly. How could you know that? Well, I've never been to either of those places. So I've been to Toronto. But the point is, I discovered that in the specific is the universal and not the other way around. Like some people will write universally, very generally, and it doesn't quite work. But when you have the guts or the courage to write from exactly what you live through, it's amazing how the collective will respond, and it will mirror their own past lives. So that was a big awakening for me, to dare to be personal.
Oh, I like that, to dare to be personal.
Even though my play, I called it a fiction, but it was based on real prototypes more than probably anything else I've written.
I know, it makes you wonder how much of fiction is actually fiction, huh?
Well, that's why I call it emotionally autobiographical.
Right.
I mean, you have to use yourself. That's your biggest tool, your memories, your senses, your values. These all contribute to what they call the author's voice. So the more authentic you can be, warts and all, I think the better the material will be.
Yeah. Well, and also as you're kind of remembering those things that influence the characters, whether it's your dysfunctional family or not, you do kind of have to heal with it. So then that kind of leads into your last class, which is heal yourself with writing. So you can break that one down too.
Yes. Let me see. Okay, I just want to read. It's my book too is called "Heal Yourself with Writing." I don't. That's the one.
And that's your space self.
Pardon?
I was just saying it's your space self. So it's not yourself.
Okay.
It's
okay. Anyway, in my introduction for the book, I use a line from J.K. Rowling from Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. It says, "It's all right, it's over, it's just a memory." Heal yourself with writing is for writers and non-writers. It's about self-healing grief and trauma and about creating a deeper dialogue with yourself. I'm told it's very useful for those writing memoir. I'll just read the opening paragraph. It's small. Our lives may be determined less by past events than by the way we remember them. If we learn how to reframe the pieces of our past and revision our life story so that suffering becomes meaningful, we can radically boost our chances of healing, empowerment, growth, and transformation. Focused journaling, short writing exercises designed to facilitate self-healing is an extremely powerful tool to achieve this aim. That just gives an idea. Three of my books, I give examples. They're all partially memoir. I use examples from my own life to illustrate the principles I'm teaching. And Heal Yourself with Writing. Now I hear from groups that are doing them as workshops all over. They'll meet once a week and do the 5-minute exercises and then share. And they say it's very powerful. I have people coming out of the 5-day workshops I do at Esalen or Omega, and they tell me this is life-changing. So what happened exactly? Well, it's not anything I did. I just facilitated. But they went to a deeper place, and then they wrote from there. And that's what was life-changing. They didn't just write from the left brain. So anyway, that's probably a long answer to your question. But.
No, but I mean, it's good. It really does get to the heart of what you need to access to truly write what you want to say.
And by the way, after writing in Hollywood some years, I wanted to take a break and I stopped working. And I went back to after teaching graduate school for 17 years, I went back to graduate school in a totally different subject. And I got a graduate degree in depth psychology and archetypal mythology at Pacifica Graduate Institutes in Santa Barbara, California. And my mother thought I was crazy. She said, "What do you want? What are you going to do with a graduate degree in mythology?" And I remember, without thinking, this was my answer, even though I didn't understand it until 2 years later. I said, "Mother, it's not what I'm going to do with mythology. It's what mythology is going to do with me." And from that 2 years, getting that extra master's, I began writing books because I had only written dramatic writing, plays, well, I'd written poetry, stories, but mainly plays and television and features, films. And you have to write so many papers in graduate school. And this was all depth psychology. So out of that, I started writing books like The Way of Story, The Craft and Soul of Writing, and Heal Yourself with Writing. But I had no idea that's what would happen. My experience is that if you follow that inner voice, that inner guide, whatever you call it, and you're faithful to it, you may not know why you're making certain decisions, but somehow it will always be right.
It's following your.
At least that's my experience. I trust that inner voice more than my logical brain.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because as you were describing, oh, sorry, thought someone was coming on. As you were describing the way you frame your story, it reminded me of how my mom has always explained things to me. She's a therapist herself, and she always talks about how you really do need to frame the story. Are you remembering it from only a sad point of view? Are you remembering it from a happier point of view? You know, which way are you actually experiencing that memory?
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly the first sentence. It's not about what happened in the past. What's more important is how we remember it. And there's an element of choice in there.
Exactly. If we give ourselves enough choice, then we can make that memory whatever we want it to be. Yeah. All right. Well, we are about up on time here, Catherine. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Now, were there any questions coming in from others, or?
Let's see. Let's check out the chat.
We still have 5 minutes, I think.
Let's see. Any questions, anybody? Feel free to write them in.
No. Well, if not, I really invite people to come no matter which workshops you sign up for, because it's a good conference. You'll meet other writers. You not only learn from the instructors, you learn from everyone you meet. So it's a great opportunity, I think.
Absolutely. So just one more time to run us through, Catherine will be at the Central Coast Writers Conference starting on September 26th, and it'll be going on until the 28th. Catherine will be teaching every day at the conference, starting with her masterclass, which is what we were just talking about, which will be Thursday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So it'll be what sounds like a very writing intensive and emotionally driven experience.
And fun.
And fun.
Some
I
of
like
the
that.
exercises are fun too. I didn't say that, but
Right. Gotta
anyway,
have some
hope
fun.
to see you there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.